Good morning. If you're joining us online, we are studying the book of Hebrews. We're going to be in chapter 12 shortly. But this morning, I'd like to do something that I've been alluding to for a long time that will begin in Leviticus 16. You'll want to go to Leviticus in the 16th chapter. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the Day of Atonement. And so much of this book we have already discussed tells you a lot about sacrifice, and it's based principally on things the writer of the book of Hebrews presumes you understand. So there is something coming in the scriptures that we're going to study that alludes heavily to the Day of Atonement, and it has a powerful message behind it. So I want you to be familiar, a little bit more so than maybe you already are, with those ideas, so that when you see it, you'll be able to recognize it and say, aha, that's what he's talking about. This will be an aha moment for you. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the Day of Atonement, and then we're coming back to the book of Hebrews in chapter 12. I want to preface this by describing a few things to you so that you will understand what's going on. Number one, this is a mandatory practice for the nation of Israel once a year. Happens on the seventh month of the year. That's Tishrei in the Hebrew calendar, and it's on the 10th day, which begins on the 9th day at sundown and extends through the 10th day at sundown. That's a day to Jews. And on that day, in addition to the things that we're talking about here, it is a day of rest, much like a Sabbath. And it's also a day of fasting. And it is necessary for everyone in the nation to participate, including foreigners or visitors. The penalty for not keeping Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is that you would, we will come to this, but there is some verbiage here. Maybe we'll save this for later if we have time. But there is a penalty, a severe penalty, for not observing this day. All right. On this day, there are sacrifices given. That doesn't come as a surprise to you. But this particular observance we're going to look at today in the book of Leviticus occurs immediately after the presumptive sins of Nadab and Abihu. You remember Aaron had 4 sons. You know Nadab and Abihu because they're infamous. But he also had Eleazar and Ithamar, who were his other sons, all of these men being the first priests. And you are going to look at Leviticus 16, which comes right on the heels of that incident with Nadab and Abihu that cost them their lives for the offering of what the scriptures describe as profane fire. Remember that? And so right after this, God inaugurates this first Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. And the chapter starts with an admonition. God telling Moses, listen, you tell your brother Aaron, don't just come into the most holy place whenever you decide to. You come when I tell you to come, or you don't come at all, and you come with blood, or you will die. So it's a very serious admonition given to Aaron. You see that in the first 2 verses of Leviticus. I would encourage you to maybe use a plain English translation of this. It makes better sense to you if you do that. And secondly, you may want to do that at home if you don't have it available right now. to rehearse these things in your mind, because when you're reading through this, it's not necessarily event after event after event. And that's what confuses people. I will tell you this, there are two types of offerings given on this Day of Atonement. Remember, I said there are 5 offerings, basic offerings. I alluded to that way back when. You may not remember. These 2 offerings are, number 1, a whole burnt offering. That's usually something voluntary, but on this day, it's compulsory. It involves the burning of an entire animal, everything. And typically, this indicates to God that you are devoted, committed, and that you, very pertinent to the lesson we had this morning, penitent, willing to do those things which he wants you to do. But again, typically a burnt offering would be a voluntary thing. On this day, it's absolutely mandatory. The second one is what's called a sin offering, a sin offering. And what a sin offering is typically on this day, it's emphasized that this is for sins that you didn't know you committed, unintentional sin. You remember in chapter 9, in verse 7, it says that Aaron, or that the high priest would enter the most holy place with blood with a blood offering for himself and for the sins of the people which they committed ignorantly. All right? That's emphasized there. Before you come to me and you say, you don't know what you're talking about, it says plainly here the sin offering could involve this and that. I am aware of that. You don't have to tell me that I'm wrong about the sin offering and all that sort of thing. I'm telling you what the author of the book of Hebrews wants to emphasize, and for you to understand. The principle is that there are sins which you don't even know you committed. We do this too. We just don't think about it because Jesus covers that for us. We don't even have to think about it. But there are sins committed by us and by them that maybe you weren't even aware of. You don't think about those things. I don't think about those things because I don't know I'm committing those things. But it's possible for us to have offended God in ways we're not even aware of. And so he says in Hebrews 9, I think it's verse 7, that those are unintentional sins. Okay? All right. So let's take a look at that chapter. I'm not going to put it up on the screen because I want you to look at it for yourself. I guess I better get a Bible, though. Hold on just a second. All right, real good. So let's look at Leviticus in the 16th chapter, and let's kind of follow along together so that we can see what we're doing. In this case, we're talking about Aaron specifically. Aaron comes to the tabernacle, and he brings with him a bullock. There are 5 animals that are going to be used here. There's going to be a bull, there are going to be 2 rams, there are going to be 2 goats. So you got 2 goats, 2 rams, and 1 bull. Are you with me? These are all male animals. They are all mature animals. All right. So Aaron comes, he brings with him a bull. He's got this bull, and that bull is for the sin offering. The sin offering. Generically, unintentional sins. He brings this for himself and for his household, for his family. He also brings with him a ram. And so he's got that for his burnt offering, okay? When he gets to the tabernacle, he goes into the inner courtyard. This is verse 4 or so. And he will change out of his ordinary priestly vestments. the high priest that you're familiar with, the high priestly garments. And before he does that, he will wash himself with water from the laver in the courtyard of the tabernacle. There's a bronze laver there. He will take water from that laver, wash himself, and then he will change out of his usual high priestly clothes into the clothes of essentially an ordinary priest. Okay? So he's not wearing the high priest clothes. That isn't used here. He's in ordinary priestly vestments like any priest that might be in the company of Israel. Okay? All right. So he's going to go into that tabernacle, into the most holy place 3 times. 3 times he's going in there. Each time he goes in there, he does a particular thing, a unique thing. And while he's doing whatever he's doing in the tabernacle, in the tent, nobody can be in there. No one but him. There are priests tending to the sacrifices with him in the courtyard, but nobody goes into that structure except for Aaron. Okay, so he is changed into the clothes of any typical priest that you would see. And then in verse 5, he takes from the flocks of the people 2 goats. 2 goats. One of them will be a sacrifice for sin, the sin sacrifice. The other one is Azazel, or the scapegoat. Okay? So you get 2 goats selected from the people. And one of them is going to be the sacrifice, the sin sacrifice. The other one's going to be Azazel, which we will come to in just a moment. In addition to that, from the flocks of the people, he will also take a ram, another ram. That's the second ram. And that's going to be the whole burnt offering for the people. Okay? So now we have all of these five animals. Now, before he can do those sacrifices, he will take coals, embers, from the altar of the burnt offerings, which is in the courtyard. Okay? Now, we've got this image of this burnt offering altar as kind of smoldering coals. There's a fire. It's a big fire going. It's got to consume animals. We're not talking about a barbecue. Here comes, do you need that? Okay, all right. So we're not talking about a small flame. We're talking about a fire sufficient to consume animals. But he's going to take coals from this thing, coals from this fire, and he's going to put it in a censer, a receptacle. He's going to take these coals and he's going to go into the most holy place with a double portion, probably 2 handfuls of incense. Put it on this censer, and the idea of which is that the smoke and aroma of these incense will fill the most holy place. He goes, this is his first visit into the most holy place. And he puts this censer in front of the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat. I'm presuming that he puts this on the ground. I don't know. I don't think there's nothing else in there. So I may be presumptuous myself, but probably he just puts this on the ground and then he leaves and lets that most holy place fill with the incense. The Lord says that if he doesn't do this properly, there will be a penalty of death. Did you notice that in that verse? In other words, when you're looking at this,
be mindful of how specific God is about the issues of how he should be worshiped, which is something that we should take to heart. It is presumptuous to think that God will be pleased by an alteration in which he has commanded us to act in worship. Note how specific it is. In other words, there's a reason we don't have instruments of music, say, today. You may like instruments of music, I might like instruments, but God has specified how he wants us to act in worship to him. So note how particular he is about how these things should be done, how he prefaced it by saying, you tell your brother Aaron, don't just come by here anytime you want to, anytime you think it's appropriate, or you will die. And again, mentioning here, if you don't do this right, it will cost you your life. And remember, again, those things are occurring on the heels of Nadab and Abihu. Okay. All right. So we go a little further. All right. So he has offered these incense, as he was asked to do, by bringing this in a censer beyond the veil. Now, after this is done, he then offers, and I'm looking to see where this is. I think it's about verse 6 and so forth, 6 and 11 in particular. He will offer that bullock. You remember, the bull is a sin offering. He'll offer that bull in the courtyard. And he will collect the blood in a laver, in a vessel. All right? So now he has offered that bullock. And you remember, that bullock is offered for his sins and for the sins of his household, his family. All right? After that is done, after he has offered that in verse, I think it's 7 and 8. I'm doing a poor job of telling you where this is, but I'm more interested in process. But I believe this is in 7 and 8. He will take those 2 goats that the people brought for their sin offering, one of which will become the actual sacrifice, blood sacrifice. The other one is the scapegoat. And he will cast lots. He will cast lots for which one will be which. All right? Now we have determined which is the scapegoat and which is the goat, which the scriptures call for the Lord. For the Lord. That's the one that's going to be sacrificed. All right. After it is that is done, in verses 12 and 13 or so, then he goes for the second time into the most holy place. I have already not done my duty here. That's the time that he's going to go in and with the censer. And then, after that is done, he will bring the blood of that bull that he offered for him and his family. And I believe that is that verse 14? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong about this. But that's his second visit into the most holy place. He will take the blood of that bull into the most holy place. Your scriptures may say on the east side of the tabernacle. That's kind of misleading. What it's talking about is the eastern face of the mercy seat. In other words, the tabernacle always faces east. Remember we talked about that? And so what he's telling him to do is, you go into the most holy place and go to the eastern side That would be the first encounter he would have as he entered that face of the mercy seat. Otherwise, he'd be on the side or behind it. He wants him to face the mercy seat, in other words, and he takes that laver of blood, he dips his finger in it, and 7 times he will sprinkle it over the mercy seat. Okay? That's his second visit to the most holy place. After it is that he has done that with the blood of the bullock, then he's going to come out and they will sacrifice one of those goats. And I think that's verse 15. The goat that is for the Lord, not the scapegoat. Okay? So he will take that goat and he will sacrifice it. All right. Then, for the last time, the third time, he's going to take the blood of that goat, which he also collected in a laver. He will go into the most holy place. He'll do the same thing, 7 times sprinkling the blood on the mercy seat. He will not go into the most holy place again till the following year. All right? So after that is done, after he has taken the blood of that goat for the people, he'll return to the altar of the burnt offerings, and he will begin to sanctify that or purify that by applying the blood of both the bull and the goat to the 4 horns on that structure. And he'll go into the holy place, not the most holy place, the holy place, and he will do the same on the 4 horns of the altar of incense. Now he has purified essentially everything devoted to the service of God. Are you with me? All right. So we have disposed of those issues of blood sacrifice. Hold your comments or your questions for just a moment, and let's finish this up. While it is that we have done all that, there is what the scriptures described as a fit man. Your translations may say a big man or a strong man. This man, presumably a priest, because he's in the courtyard, will take this other goat. He'll take the other goat, the Azazel. He will take the scapegoat, and he will lead this beast out of town into a wilderness area. In other words, a fit man, somebody capable, somebody physically capable. Don't select somebody feeble. So it's not an honorarium necessarily. It's a duty. It's a responsibility. And so God tells this fit man, take this beast, this scapegoat, into a wilderness area, an uninhabited area. Traditionally, in some secular text, they will sometimes describe this beast as having a scarlet cord tied about its neck or about its horns to identify it as a scapegoat, because there it lives out its life in a wilderness area so that it will not be encountered by any other human being. And it would be identified and avoided. You don't want to ever have any contact with this creature ever again. It will defile you. Okay. All right. While all that's going on, this takes time, obviously. This guy's got to take this thing out of town. And so time is transpiring. Aaron must stay and oversee all of this. It's his responsibility to make sure that this is done. He's high priest. All right. While all that is being done, and Aaron is going to return to the holy place. He's going to wash himself, and he's going to take off his ordinary priestly vestments, and he's going to put back on the traditional garb of a high priest. So now he's dressed just like you would expect him to be dressed, in the ornate garments of a high priest. And he'll come out of the holy place, not the most holy place. He has already been there 3 times, and he doesn't come back in there. We're talking about the first compartment, the first apartment of the tabernacle. He will change himself in there, and then he will come back out. When he comes back out, he is going to offer the ram that he brought as a whole burnt offering, and he is going to offer the ram that the people have brought for their whole burnt offering. You've got those two particular animals, and what is that? Verse 23, 24, somewhere around in there. All right, so that's in the entire animal, everything on the altar, the burnt offering. It will be consumed by fire, totally. At the same time, he's going to take a fatty portion of the animals that he used for the sin offering. That one goat that the people brought, and that one bull that he brought. He's going to take a fatty portion of that, and he's going to offer that as a burnt offering. We can talk some other time what portion that is. But after that is done, there is an individual selected, another man, and he will collect the remains of the sin offerings. He will take those out of the city, outside the camp. And he will take those remains and he'll burn them entirely outside the camp. Then these 2 men, the one that took the azazel away and the one that took the remains of the offerings, they will change their clothes and wash themselves completely. And then they're allowed to come back into the camp of the people. That's what's going on that day. Now, I wonder, do you have a question or a comment that you want to make? Go ahead.
2 questions.
Yes, sir.
One, do Jews today do the thing you just described?
No, it would be impossible for anyone to do this today. First of all, there is no tabernacle. There are no priests. It's impossible to determine, even if you knew you were of the families of the priests, who would be the high priest. So it would be just from a functional perspective, it would be impossible to do today in the wisdom of God. I'm sorry? Well, I'm presuming when the temple ended in AD 70, that would be the last time you had a high priest or a venue to do this at. Okay? Go ahead.
Second question. The 2 goats and 1 ram that the people brought.
Right.
Who was, I know the people. Which people?
It's a good question. They are representative specimens. Aaron selects his own. The people probably, or Aaron, it's hard to know, the people select out those animals. Those animals have to be, this is well prepared for. They have to be perfect. They've got to be exactly what it is. The Lord will not accept imperfection. He will not. And so they are inspected, selected out. You can be guaranteed that this is much bigger circumstance than the national Christmas tree. We're talking about animals individually that must be exactly what it is that the Lord wants. Okay? Why am I making such a big deal of this? And why is this so important? Because there is something coming in the book that you want to know about. If you don't recognize it, again, the writer of the book of Hebrews presumes that you're initiated in these things. He's principally writing to Hebrews who would know these things. But you and I, we as Larry has said, we don't live in that world. I've never been to a Day of Atonement like that. I've never participated in those sorts of things. And so you and I don't even think about these things. All right? Anybody else have a question about that? Again, the things to be emphatic about are that the sin offerings are the sins of unintentional nature. I didn't know I did it. That's possible. You know, you can do things that offend God that even you don't know about. Maybe we're doing it today, not intentionally again, but unintentionally. Those things still offend God, and they still are sinful, and they still must be atoned for. That's the idea. Okay? So you want to remember that, and you also want to remember the events that don't involve blood sacrifice, like the removal of those things that metaphorically represent sin. I should tell you that when Aaron casted the lots and determined which one of those beasts was the scapegoat, he places his hands firmly on the head of that animal, and he transfers the sins of Israel onto this animal. And then it is released into the wilderness. Are you with me? Okay. Keep that in mind, because we won't use it today. I want you to let it kind of sink in for just a minute, and I want you to understand what's going on that day so that when it comes up again, you'll know it. And it is coming up again. Trust me, it's a biggie. All right, let's go to chapter 12 here for just a moment, as we were doing before, and we'll take a look at some things that we were looking at last week. You remember in chapter 11 that he had discussed a litany, a laundry list of people who were faithful, and he started this whole thing by saying, you know, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen, and we talked about that. In a loose way of saying that, you might say that faith is an assurance of things you can't see, that you know are there, or you wouldn't be hoping for them. I've never been to heaven, but I am absolutely certain there is a heaven. And I don't say that because I want it to be. I say it because I have an evidentiary sort of perspective of heaven. I know it's there because I have assurances through God's word. It never fails. I've never known God's word to be wrong. I can depend on it, and therefore I can depend on the issue of whether or not there is a heaven. I know that this world exists. It is physical. It's all around me. It didn't just happen. It's an evidence that somebody of great power, the magnitude of which you cannot even comprehend, has placed us here for a purpose. And so our faith is not based on things that aren't substantive, that aren't provable. Quite the contrary. And then he goes through a list of people, some named, some unnamed. And he shows you these people, they all did magnificent things and suffered tremendously, all because of what? Why? Because they had faith. They had faith in the hope before them. And the hope before them is heaven. It's salvation. And guess what? We're the same people. All those people died never realizing the fulfillment of the promise, heaven. You may well do the same. And so it's important to live, as Mark's lesson told us this morning, be faithful unto death. As the book of Revelation says, be faithful unto death and receive a crown. All right? So it is that every person, I blew the Untitled Chapter on this one discussion. But every person, you and I, if we're ever going to be saved, it'll be because we were faithful unto death. All right, let's look at whatever chapter 12 offers us in the few minutes we have remaining. In chapter 12 it says this, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, those witnesses are the witnesses discussed in chapter 11. By the way, when he's using the term witnesses, he's referring to what? What's that mean, witness? Somebody who's experienced those things. Right. So we have so great a cloud of witnesses. The term cloud's interesting there because it describes a ubiquitous, innumerable number of people. We don't think of ourselves that way. We always think of ourselves as kind of a minority. We're Christians. There aren't a whole lot of us, faithful Christians, members of the true church. But when you think about it, we're talking about all the faithful who have ever lived, from Adam on. That's a lot of people. People before the law of Moses, people before the law of Christ. God's always had a lot of faithful people round about him. An innumerable host of people is what he's describing there. He says, because you have this cloud of witnesses, you too want to be one of them. Lay aside all the things that keep you from doing that. Lay aside every weight, every sin that so easily ensnares us. Your translation may say that clings to us, holds us back. It's like running a marathon, he's describing, in a suit. You wouldn't do that. All right, so he says, let us run with endurance the race that's set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. He's the progenitor. He started this, and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. I have emphasized that word shame. That word shame is part and parcel of some of the things we were talking about this morning in Leviticus 6. We will come back to it. But I want you to remember that that word shame is used there. Going to the cross was a shameful thing for those who purviewed it with the wrong perspective. It's a glory and a success to us. But just like the scriptures say, cursed is everyone that what? Hangs on a tree. That is not a good thing, to be on public display having been executed publicly, for everyone to say, there's a bad man, there's a not so nice fella, don't be like that guy. It's a shameful thing, but Jesus did not consider it so. Go ahead, Victor, end us up. Right. Absolutely. You want to be one of them. Absolutely. And then he sat down at the right hand of God. And we've discussed that before, about that position of honor. I almost want to stop here because I don't want to do an injustice to the rest of this. But let me tell you this. When we're looking at this 12th chapter of the book of Hebrews, and you go further into it, there is a lot discussed about shame and dishonor and abuse and disrespect, not only for Jesus, but for you. That's where faith comes in. That's where it becomes important, to remind yourself of the hope of heaven as you traverse life's way. And if you're not a faithful member of God's church, you will never be pleasing to him. You have no hope. Next week, when we pick up in chapter 12, hopefully I can get through that whole thing, and then we can come back and talk about some of the things that we learned today. Go home and look at Leviticus 6 on your own. Inspect it a little bit so you'll be a little bit more familiar with it. Thank you so much.